There's a hypothesis that almost everyone believes in. Gather food in one place. The peaceful will survive. Spread the resources out into small groups. Let the cooperators come together, and aggression will subside. Less fighting over every scrap. More peace. Sounds like common sense. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding simulation, please post them in the comments. I'll be sure to respond. I built a simulation to test this. 2 types of creatures. Peaceful ones, they share food and don't get into fights. Aggressive ones, they take everything and fight to the death. I ran the simulation once with food spread out evenly, and a second time with the same food gathered into dense piles. The only variable, how the food is distributed on the map. The peaceful ones won. Their numbers grew. Cooperation flourished, exactly as the theory predicted. And then I looked at the second number, and I realized that I had accidentally built a displacement machine. And then I looked at the second number, and I realized that I had accidentally built a displacement machine. The very mechanism that saved the peaceful ones is the same one that turned the simulation into a bloodbath. Not despite, not as a side effect. A single move that allows the peaceful ones to survive simultaneously drives up the mortality rate. How can cooperation make a simulation more deadly? This isn't just an opinion. Clustering food raises the proportion of civilians from 44 to 62% on average. And this isn't a fluke from a single successful simulation. The lowest result among the clustered runs, 52%, is higher than the average result of the uniform distribution. All 5 clustered simulations showed the same upward trend, and at the same time, mortality is not going down, it's going up. 2 numbers that, according to the textbooks, should be moving in opposite directions are moving in the same direction, up, both of them. And there's a third figure, because the simulation didn't just become deadlier, it became more unfair. One half of the population began to disappear, while the other began to grow, not because one fought harder, for a reason I'll explain to you step by step. I'm not going to explain right now why this happened. It would be unfair to give away the ending before you've followed the path of my hypothesis yourselves, because you can only truly understand this result if you first believe the opposite. If I had simply given you the numbers, you would have said, yeah, that's strange, but so what? But if you first believe in the logic that leads to the opposite conclusion, and the simulation disproves it, you'll feel the same way I did when I saw the result. This isn't about the numbers, it's about how trust in a model works. First, we need to understand the rules of the game. Let's start with a question that's more than 50 years old and earned a Nobel Prize. Why do animals fighting over territory or a mate so rarely kill each other? Why do deer lock horns instead of striking each other in the side? Why do wolves fight, but more often, one offers its throat and the other doesn't tear it apart? Intuition suggests the more aggressive, the greater the reward. Aggression should have taken over the world, but it hasn't. The explanation lies not in morality, but in mathematics. Imagine 2 individuals meeting over a single piece of food. 2 peaceful ones split it in half. Each gets 2 units, and both are full. A peaceful one and a confrontational one. The peaceful one backs down, and the confrontational one takes all 4. 2 confrontational ones both fight to the bitter end. The winner gets the food, but the cost of the fight may outweigh the gain. The loser pays with their health, and sometimes with their life. Death in this simulation comes from a single scenario: conflict-prone versus conflict-prone. Peaceful versus peaceful, they part ways unscathed. Peaceful versus conflict-prone, the peaceful one retreats but survives. Only 2 conflict-prone individuals fighting over a single piece of food pay the true price. That's why, in this simulation, the conflict-prone alone cannot win. A world where everyone fights to the death for every scrap devours itself. And that's why the peaceful alone cannot win. In a population consisting entirely of polite individuals, it's always advantageous to infiltrate a single conflict-prone individual who takes everything without paying for anything. The system balances somewhere in between. There is a point of equilibrium, not morality or choice, but a place where the forces are balanced by the very mathematics of encounters. So, the number of deaths doesn't depend on how many conflict-prone individuals are in the population. It depends on how often a conflict-prone individual runs into another conflict-prone individual. And that's not about proportion, it's about encounters. Proportion is not the frequency of encounters. It is in this gap that the naive hypothesis falls apart. Now, the model. The value of a single piece is 4. There are 40 units of food per day. This is the same in both simulations. The only difference is how these 40 units are distributed across the field. The first scenario is uniform. Food is scattered everywhere in small amounts. There are almost never crowds around a single piece. Control. The second scenario is clustered. The same amount of food, but gathered into dense clusters. There's nothing between the clusters. If you want to eat, go there. But there's already a crowd there. The difference lies in the geometry. The food is evenly distributed. But in the first scenario, encounters are rare and random. In the second, they're inevitable and crowded. And we've just figured out that death thrives precisely in encounters between conflicting parties. Now, a naive hypothesis. It's a good one, not a strawman that's easy to knock down. It has real logic behind it. When food is in small patches, the peaceful ones who happen to be nearby feed side by side, share the patch peacefully, and produce offspring. A local island of peaceful individuals sustains itself. A peaceful one, next to a peaceful one, is a stable, safe arrangement. Both are well fed, both survive. But it's harder for the aggressive ones in such a crowd. The more aggressors rush toward a rich patch, the more often they bump into each other, bashing their heads in, instead of preying on the meek. The cluster seems to reward those who know how to get along and penalize those who pick fights. The peaceful build safe havens around the food. Here's the thing, this logic is exactly half right. The peaceful ones do indeed thrive. The simulation will confirm this. Islands of safety do emerge. Everything I've described actually happens on the field. The problem isn't that the reasoning is false. The problem is that it sees the islands of safety and fails to see what appears around them. Look where the flaw lies. The hypothesis counts the peaceful. It says there are more peaceful people, so the simulation is milder. But we already know that death in this simulation doesn't count civilians. Death counts clashes between conflicting parties. And the hypothesis about the proportion of civilians says nothing at all about how often agents clash. It's about the composition of the crowd, not about how crowded it is. If there really are more peaceful agents, does that mean there are fewer deaths? Now, let's look at how the model itself works, because every number will come from here, and I want you to see where it comes from. Agents live in the field. Each follows a single strategy, peaceful or conflict-prone. This strategy is passed down through inheritance. Those who have had their fill leave behind offspring of their own type. Peaceful agents give birth to peaceful agents, and conflict-oriented agents give birth to conflict-oriented ones. The proportion isn't set by me. It grows out of how much each agent has eaten and who they've fought with. Each agent has another label, nation, blue and red. This isn't about strategy. A peaceful blue behaves the same as a peaceful red, and a conflict-oriented blue is no more aggressive than a conflict-oriented red. Nation is about origin, lineage. Blues give birth to blues and reds to reds. Strategy and nation coexist within an agent without mixing. I added nation to see not only which strategy wins, but also exactly who populates the simulation in the end. In a controlled, uniform simulation, nation hardly matters at all. There are roughly equal numbers of blue and red, as there should be if geography doesn't matter. But in a cluster simulation, this counter will show something entirely different. Textbooks usually address only the first question. The second, who survived, arises only when the simulation includes geography. Food appears from sources, spawners. They have fixed locations on the map. In a uniform simulation, there are many sources. They're scattered across the field, so food spreads out in a thin layer everywhere. In a clustered simulation, there are only a few, clustered in one place, so food falls in dense patches. And this is where the secret lies. The one thing people usually keep quiet about. Since food has fixed locations, the field acquires a geographical structure. There are places where people can live in abundance and places where they live in hunger. And since agents are born near their parents, and their parents lived where they ate, nations develop a homeland. In a uniform simulation, this doesn't matter. There's plenty everywhere. In a clustered simulation, it becomes a matter of survival for an entire lineage. A single day in the simulation. In the morning, food pours out of sources. Agents, hungry from the previous day, head toward it. Along the way, they clash over a piece of food, at a patch, or on the approach. Each clash plays out according to the rules of peace and conflict. Some share, some yield, some fight. Those who have eaten their fill gather enough for their offspring. Those wounded in the fights die. By evening, the tally is made. Who is alive, who is dead, who has given birth. The next day, everything repeats. Only the composition of the population has shifted slightly. There are slightly more of those strategies and those nations that were lucky with food yesterday. 200 days like this, and the simulation reaches equilibrium. I'm not looking at the first day, when everything is still fluctuating from the random initial conditions. I'm looking at the final outcome, not the initial reaction. And here's the moment that separates the simulation from a pretty picture. 200 steps, and not just one run. 5 different starting configurations, scenarios 42 through 46. The same rules, but the initial setups are slightly different. A single run is a joke. Maybe in this particular simulation, the aggressor just had bad luck at the start. 5 runs under identical rules, all pointing in the same direction. That's no longer a coincidence. It's a property of the system, something that can't be chalked up to luck. 5 out of 5. That's the whole setup. The rules of the encounter, 4 outcomes, death in one of them. Value 4, 40 meals a day. 2 tags, strategy and nation. 200 days, 5 simulations instead of 1, a single switch between control and experiment. How the food is distributed. I press start and don't interfere anymore. I don't decide who will win or who will die out. I just distribute the food in 2 ways. Mathematics takes care of the rest. And mathematics has no favorite theory. It simply runs through the rules and shows what happens. And if the result isn't what I expected, then I was wrong, not it. I pressed start and waited. 200 days in each of the 10 simulations. And when the calculations were complete, I opened the spreadsheet. The first number confirmed my hypothesis. The percentage of peaceful players had increased significantly from 44 to 62%. Cooperation flourished exactly where I'd expected it to. I almost closed the experiment, feeling that I'd merely confirmed the obvious. Almost. Keep both questions open. How does cooperation make the simulation deadlier? And does more peaceful players mean fewer deaths? Because you've almost guessed the answer to the second one. You just guessed it wrong. The table is right next to me. 2 columns. On the left, a uniform simulation, where food is spread in a thin layer across the entire field. On the right, a clustered simulation, where the same food is gathered into dense patches. Everything else is the same. 200 days, 40 units of food per day, the same encounter rules, the same 5 starting layouts from seat 42 to 46. Only the geometry of the food changes. A single variable. All we'll see in these 2 columns is the system's answer to the question, which is more important, the amount of food or its distribution? The answer, as it turns out, is distribution. And it gives me goosebumps. First row, percentage of peaceful outcomes. In the uniform distribution, 44.5%, 0.4452. In the clustered distribution, 61.6, 0.6162. A relative increase of 38%. The number of peaceful ones has increased significantly, and this isn't just one lucky run. The range, in the uniform run, from 36 to 55%. The range is wide, almost a 20% spread. In the clustered run, from 52 to 73. The spread is just as wide, but it lies entirely above the uniform run. Even the worst clustered run has a higher proportion of peaceful individuals than the average uniform run. 5 runs, and all 5 point in the same direction. The variation isn't chaos, but the range of the same mechanism. Clustering always increases the proportion of peaceful individuals, just with varying intensity depending on the starting conditions. The first half of the hypothesis has been confirmed. Spatial structure does indeed help cooperators. Peaceful individuals gather around food, share it, and reproduce. Safe havens work. The proportion of conflict-prone individuals has dropped from 55 to 38%. If we had stopped at this point, it would have been a neat educational conclusion. Gather resources, and goodness will flourish. I believed it myself for a second when I saw the first figure. We didn't stop there. But at what cost? The second line, mortality. In the uniform model, 0.216, 21st. In the cluster model, 0.45, 45th. The ratio is 2.08. Mortality has doubled and exceeded that level. Variation. In the uniform model, from 0, 1 run with virtually no losses, to 400ths. In the clustered model, from 2.5 to 5.5. The lower limit of the clustered model is already higher than the average of the uniform model. Even the calmest clustered world is bloodier than a typical uniform one. 5 out of 5, again. The number is 2.8. This is not approximately 2. 2.8 is the average across 5 runs. In individual runs, the coefficient is even higher. Is the lower bound of cluster mortality, 2.5, already higher than the upper bound of uniform mortality, 4? No, the upper bound of uniform mortality is 400ths, and the lower limit of the clustered distribution starts at 2.5, but the average of the uniform distribution, 0.21, lies below the lowest value of the clustered distribution, 0.26, so means a 2-fold increase. That's not the headline. It's the floor, not the ceiling. The rings around the spots are so dense that the system doesn't just amplify the effect, it's operating at the limits of its geometry. And the answer to the question that's been hanging in the air since the very first act, does more civilians mean fewer deaths? Intuition suggests, yes, of course. The simulation says no, no. In this system, it's the opposite. There are more civilians, but twice as many deaths. Not the same number. There are actually more. The total number has hardly changed. 166 agents in the uniform system, 159 in the cluster system. A difference of 7.5. The field hasn't been wiped out, it's full of civilians. And for the same population, there are twice as many deaths. This isn't a war that leaves the field empty. It's a war taking place in a thriving, densely populated field. Imagine a city with the same number of people, but where people die twice more often. This is the simulation I called the displacement machine. A thriving slaughterhouse. That is what clustering has created. Why? Why didn't cooperation reduce mortality? Why did it increase it? It's not about proportion. It's about geometry. Recall how death works in this simulation. Death comes only from a single cell, conflictant versus conflictant. A peaceful one and a peaceful one parted ways unharmed. A peaceful one and a conflictant one, the peaceful one retreated but survived. Mortality isn't determined by how many conflict-prone individuals are in the population. It's determined by how often they encounter each other. Proportion and density are different things, and this discrepancy is where the hypothesis fell apart. In a uniform simulation, conflict-prone individuals were numerous in proportion, 55%. But they were spread out in a thin layer, and having 2 on a single patch was rare. In the clustered simulation, the proportion of aggressive individuals was lower, 38%, but they were confined to the boundaries of the patches, where they constantly clashed. Here's the crux. Conflict-prone individuals end up at this boundary not because they are more aggressive. Strategy cannot be switched on the fly. A conflict-prone individual cannot become peaceful and enter the patch. They need food, and food is only found within the patch. Outside lies emptiness, hunger, and death by starvation. They are doomed to head for the same patch that the peaceful ones went to, but inside, their advantage crumbles. The peaceful ones have taken their places, they rarely fight, and instead of food, the conflict-prone ones get a fight with others, just like themselves. They are pushed to the edge. And at the edge, in that tiny patch between the well-fed core and the hungry void, the conflict-prone constantly clash. This is not a temporary effect, it is equilibrium. The conflict-prone physically cannot be anywhere except at the spot's border because all the food is locked inside, and the density of the peaceful ones prevents him from entering. A formula without unnecessary magic. For the peaceful to flourish, resources must be gathered. When resources are gathered, the conflict-prone are locked at its boundary, with emptiness and hunger on the other side, and the frequency of their encounters grows faster than their proportion declines. Clustering did not eliminate clashes, it concentrated them. The sporadic skirmishes of a uniform world have condensed into several heated rings, an island of safety and a ring of carnage, two zones of the same form. And this is no random snapshot. The ring is reproduced from generation to generation. Children are born near their parents. The peaceful ones at the core are well fed, survive, and produce more peaceful ones, and the island grows. The conflict-prone ones at the edge, those who survived and made it to the food, also leave offspring, right on the border, at the very center of the clashes. The ring doesn't fade, it feeds on the same spot that feeds the peaceful ones. The more peaceful ones there are at the core, the more stable the spot becomes, the longer the border holds, and the longer the meat grinder keeps running. Cooperation fuels the slaughter. In a uniform simulation, there is no such closed cycle. There, food is everywhere, the agents are spread out, and having two conflicting agents over a single piece of food is a random rarity that does not reproduce itself. In cluster geometry, the patch turns an island of peaceful agents into a pump. It constantly generates well-fed, peaceful agents inside and constantly feeds the ring of fighting agents on the outside. This is not temporary chaos. It is a regime. The system rests on this form because each of its elements supports its neighbor. The price of the peaceful one's victory turned out to be twofold. It's not just the carnage. There's a third line. In the uniform simulation, the blue and red nations are almost evenly split, 52 to 47, nearly a tie, as one would expect when geography doesn't matter. In the clustered simulation, 64 and 86 hundredths versus 35 and 14, 65% versus 35%. The blue nation takes up 2/3 of the field. The red nation shrinks to 1/3. Range from 54 to 82% blue. The lowest, still a blue majority. The highest, 82, an almost complete disappearance of the reds, 82 to 18. 5 out of 5, not a single run, showed the opposite result. And look how this range mirrors what we saw in the first two metrics. The proportion of peaceful people, all 5 runs show an increase, with a range from 52 to 73. Mortality, all 5 show an increase, with a range from 2.5 to 5.5. National capture rate, all 5 in one direction, with a range from 54 to 82. 3 different metrics, 3 different ranges, and the same verdict, 5 out of 5, all in one direction. This is what distinguishes the system's law from the luck of a single run. It's important to be precise. The blue faction here isn't better, more peaceful, or more vicious. The strategies of both nations are identical. A peaceful blue faction behaves exactly the same as a peaceful red one. The difference lies in location. In this run, the blue nation happened to be closer to food sources, the spawners. Then the complex dynamics of lineage kicked in. Whoever eats at a spot gives birth at that spot. Whoever gives birth at a spot eats there again. Each generation reinforces the same location. The location becomes destiny. If the labels were swapped, it wouldn't be the blue nation that dominates, but the line closest to the resource. Clustering doesn't pick a favorite based on color. It amplifies the initial inequality of access. In a uniform simulation, this inequality is almost non-existent. Food is everywhere, and both nations are equally well fed. But as soon as the food is gathered into clusters, the spot's location becomes a privilege that is passed down through generations. Is this an isolated case or a systemic phenomenon? We already know the answer from the distribution. 5 out of 5, not a single run, yielded the opposite result. But why is it always blue? Or is this just a coincidence specific to this set of 5 runs? Perhaps red would dominate in another set of 5. The answer lies in the geography of the spawners, and I'll explain it in the next act. For now, just note this fact. The clustering of food has turned the simulation into a machine that favors a single lineage, and this is not a coincidence, but a property of the system. 3 rows in the table. The proportion of peaceful individuals from 44 to 61. Mortality from 21 hundredths to 45, a factor of 2.8. The blue nation from 52 to 65. The red nation from 47 to 35. 3 numbers, 1 switch. The geometry of food. If you saw them separately, each would look like its own story, but all 3 together. 1 story told from 3 angles. Resource clustering helps cooperators survive, concentrates violence at the borders, and turns proximity to resources into demographic power. 1 spring, 3 strikes. None of these numbers cancels out the others. All 3 come as a package, and you can't get the first without getting the other 2. Gather food into clusters, and the system will respond to you with 3 different voices at once. The proportion of peaceful people will grow. Mortality will double. One lineage will begin to supplant another. The code doesn't argue. It enforces the rules to the letter. We close the table, and there are 3 numbers on the table. The proportion of peaceful people from 44 to 61. Mortality from 21 to 45 hundredths, 2 and 8 hundredths times as high. The blue nation 65%, the red 35. 3 numbers, 1 switch, the geometry of food. Now, the answers to the 2 loops that are still open. Why did the blue nation take over the field? Not because the blues are better, not because their strategy turned out to be more profitable. Here is a map of the spawners, the permanent food sources on the field. In a uniform simulation, there are many of them, they are scattered, and each nation gets roughly an equal share. In the clustered simulation, there are fewer sources, and they're arranged so that one lineage is closer to them right from the start. Then the complex lineage percentage comes into play. Whoever eats at a spot gives birth at that spot. Whoever gives birth at a spot eats at the spot again. Those who started farther away keep returning to the occupied edge and reproduce more slowly. Combine these 2 facts, food at a fixed location, children near their parents, and the coordinate becomes destiny. The spot becomes home. Home provides sustenance. Satiety leads to offspring. The offspring occupy the same spot again. The line on the outside isn't losing a battle. It's losing a complex percentage of coordinates. Over generations, the difference of a little closer to the spawner becomes the difference between home versus the corridor. 5 out of 5. Not a single run showed the opposite result. There is variation from 54 to 82% blue. But the trend is clear. This isn't a fluke of a single run. It's a property of the system. If a resource has a fixed address and lineage, which started closer, it secures the advantage and doesn't relinquish it. And note, the variation here does not weaken the argument. It confirms it. The mechanism operates with varying intensity depending on the starting point, but always in the same direction. Variation isn't chaos, but a fork in the same mechanism. As with the 2 previous metrics, the proportion of peaceful players, mortality, and national conquest, all 3 show the same pattern, 5 out of 5 in one direction, different intensity, same direction. Now, the second loop. Why did cooperation not simply fail to help, but actually make the simulation deadlier? Here too, the answer lies at the same point on the map. Spatial cooperation cannot exist without a concentration of resources. For the peaceful players to gather together and share food peacefully, the food must be concentrated in clusters. But as soon as the food is clustered, the hostile players, who also need food, are drawn to those same clusters. Once inside, their advantage crumbles. The peaceful ones have taken the core, sharing food peacefully, and the conflict-prone get not the spoils, but a fight with others just like them. They are trapped at the border. On one side, emptiness and hunger, and there, in that tiny patch between the well-fed core and the emptiness, the density of encounters among the conflict-prone skyrockets, helping the peaceful and feeding the carnage. In this geometry, these are not 2 separate operations. 1. Because the peaceful ones don't just survive near the food, their density maintains the shape of the patch, and the shape of the patch maintains the border, and the border maintains the ring of death. The more peaceful ones there are in the core, the more stable the patch, the longer the border holds, the longer the meat grinder keeps running. And here it's worth pausing to consider an idea that unites the answers to both loops, and which cannot be guessed without running the simulation. In this model, punishment does not come for aggression, it comes for one's position. A conflict agent does not suffer for being a conflict agent. In a uniform simulation, more than half of them are conflict agents, and the system survives. The one who suffers is the one who finds themselves trapped at the spot's boundary, where other conflict agents are closing in on them. And the nation suffers not because it is worse, but because its starting position happened to be farther from the food. There is no winner in a moral sense. There is the nation that started off better, and there is the one that started off worse, and reproduction at the spot only widens the gap. Over generations, the difference in control of the field is no longer about the starting point. It's about the fact that one location has become a homeland, while the other has become a void. It's not that the blue nation won, it's that the blue nation ended up at home, while the red nation ended up in the hallway. And in this system, being at home is not a matter of merit, it's a coordinate. Look at this from a strategic perspective. In a uniform simulation, where food is everywhere, strategy truly matters. Peaceful and conflict-prone groups balance each other out, and the nation doesn't matter. In a clustered simulation, geography nullifies strategy. You can be the kindest agent and still fade away in the gap between food patches because there's less food there and your lineage doesn't get fed. You can be a conflict-oriented agent and survive on the border, because even though the border is deadly, it also feeds you. The system doesn't ask about intentions, it asks for an address. One final loop remains, the one with which we began this episode. How can cooperation make the simulation more deadly? Not merely failing to help, but specifically more deadly. Here is the answer, pieced together from our entire journey. Clustering resources increases the proportion of peaceful individuals, while simultaneously doubling mortality and ceding the field to a single lineage. Not two different mechanisms, but one. A fixed resource address simultaneously reinforces local cooperation, border violence, and hereditary inequality of access. It's not kindness that kills, kindness builds islands of safety. But right at the very edge of these islands, clustering paves the way for carnage. Because cooperation requires concentration, concentration creates a boundary, the boundary gathers clashes, peaceful ones, the foundation upon which the ring stands. Without them, there would be neither a stable patch, nor a boundary, nor a meat grinder. Clustering does not turn on violence somewhere separately. It changes the very form of how beings are distributed across the field. Concentration responds to all three loops at once. 3 strikes, 1 spring. We're used to interpreting such worlds through the lens of strategy. Who's peaceful? Who's aggressive? Who's right? The model offers a harsher answer. With a fixed resource location, strategy is secondary. The map is primary. You can be peaceful and blend into the spots. You can be conflict prone and feed on the edge. Here, it's not intention that's punished or rewarded, it's the coordinate. The field quiets down at the 200th step. Peaceful entities are inside the spots. Conflict-prone ones are at the borders. One lineage is denser near the resource. The other is farther away. The system hasn't corrected itself. It has reached equilibrium and remains there. This isn't temporary chaos. It's a steady state. If the rules aren't changed and food isn't redistributed, the system will remain in this form because each of its elements supports its neighbor. In a uniform simulation, there is no such closed loop. There, food is everywhere, the agents are spread out, and the conflicting ones are not trapped anywhere. In cluster geometry, the spot turns an island of peace into a pump. It constantly generates well-fed individuals inside and constantly feeds the ring of fighters on the outside. And a stable spot is also a stable location that keeps a nation tied to the resource generation after generation. All three effects feed into one another. There's no one to disrupt their balance from within. No one changes the rules. No one redistributes the food. I'm not going to tell you what to do about this. The simulation didn't provide any instructions. I have only 3 numbers and 1 mechanism that connects them. Gather the food into piles, and those who share truly get a chance. But with that same hand, you're setting the stage for a bloodbath on the fringes, and with that same hand, you turn proximity to an address into a right to a future. 1 motion, 3 faces. The code doesn't argue. If you have any questions or suggestions regarding the simulation, please post them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them.